"Don't go inside yet," the building's night watchman said, stepping in front of me with one hand raised. "Please, ma'am, just wait by my booth. There's something you need to see first." I almost laughed. I was 63 years old. I had a casserole dish in both hands, and I was standing in the parking garage of my daughter's apartment building at 7 in the morning because she'd asked me to come early and help set up before the signing, the closing on her new house, the biggest purchase of her life. "Excuse me?" I said. "Mrs. Aldridge." He knew my name. That stopped me cold. "Please, just 5 minutes. Come with me." His name was Cormac. I'd seen him a dozen times over the years, every time I visited my daughter. He was somewhere in his 50s, always had a coffee thermos on the desk, always nodded at me like we were old friends. He was not the kind of man who made scenes. He was not the kind of man who stopped grandmothers in parking garages and asked them to wait. I set the casserole dish on the hood of my car and followed him. Let me back up because none of this will make sense otherwise. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is, the whole of her, not just a name, had been with her boyfriend for 2 years. Monty. That was what everyone called him. Montgomery Fisk, 38 years old, sales director at some medical supply company, drove a silver car that was always freshly washed. He had good manners at the dinner table and remembered to ask about my hip after I had surgery last spring. On paper, he was everything. I didn't trust him. I want to be careful here because I spent a lot of time telling myself I was being unfair. My daughter is 35. She's sharp. She has a master's degree and she manages 12 people at her job, and she does not need her mother second-guessing every decision she makes. I know that. I knew it then. But there was something about Monty that sat wrong with me, and I could never put a finger on what it was. It wasn't anything he said. It was more like a gap, a small, persistent gap between what he said and what his face did when he said it. The way he talked about money like it was water, always flowing somewhere, always just out of reach, always about to be plentiful again soon. My husband used to say, "Watch the way a man talks about money when he doesn't have any. That tells you everything." My husband has been gone for 4 years. I still hear him, sometimes, in moments like that. My daughter and Monty had been living together for 8 months. Last fall, they found a house. A real house with a yard and a finished basement and a neighborhood, with sidewalks 30 minutes outside of the city. She was so happy when she called me. I could hear it in her voice, that particular kind of happy that's also a little bit terrified, the way she used to sound on the first day of school when she was little. The house was $340,000. My daughter had saved for years. She had $60,000 for the down payment, money she'd been putting away since she was 26, money she earned dollar by dollar, doing work that mattered to her. Monty was contributing the rest through a mortgage they were taking out together. Or so she believed. Cormac took me to his booth, the little glass and concrete room just inside the garage entrance. He had a monitor on the desk that cycled through security camera feeds. He pulled up something on his phone instead. "I almost didn't say anything," he said. "I almost just let it go. But I've seen you come in here for years, and I have a daughter too, ma'am." He handed me the phone. It was a text conversation, his own thread with a number I didn't recognize. The texts were from 2 nights ago. The first message from the unknown number, "You still working at Parkview on Friday morning?" Cormac had typed back, "Yeah, why?" The unknown number, "Aldridge woman usually parks in the garage, right?" The mother, Cormac, "Who is this?" "Unknown. Doesn't matter, just keep her out of the building until 8:30. There's $200 in it for you. Sliding under your booth door Thursday night." Cormac had not responded to that last message, but there had been an envelope under his booth door Thursday night. He showed it to me, still sealed. He hadn't opened it. "I don't know who sent it," he said, "but your daughter's closing is at 8 o'clock this morning, and somebody didn't want you walking in until it was done." I stood there holding his phone, and I felt something cold move through me from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet. "Call her," I said. "Call my daughter right now." I tried, about 20 minutes ago. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. She would have her phone on silent. She always put it on silent for anything important, any meeting, any presentation. She'd been doing it since college. She would not want any interruptions on the morning she signed for her house. I left the casserole on my car and I walked to the elevator. I need to tell you what I'd been noticing, because it didn't start with Cormac. About 6 weeks before the closing, I was helping my daughter go through some paperwork. She'd asked me to look over a few things with her, just to have a second pair of eyes, because her father used to handle all the financial documents in our house, and she'd picked up some of his habits, wanted someone to double-check her thinking. We were at her kitchen table with coffee, and I was reading through the mortgage disclosure forms when I noticed something. The loan amount was $310,000, but the purchase price of the house was $340,000. My daughter was putting in $60,000. That math doesn't work. A $60,000 down payment on a $340,000 house means the loan should be $280,000, not $310,000. I asked her about it. She frowned, looked at the form, and said she'd ask Monty. He was the one who'd been handling most of the paperwork on his end, talking to the lender, coordinating the timeline. She asked him that evening, in front of me. He barely glanced at the paper. Said it was a different calculation, something about closing costs being rolled in, interest rate adjustments, nothing to worry about. Said it with the kind of easy confidence that made her nod and turn back to her wine. I kept my mouth shut, but I wrote the numbers down when I got home. $280,000 versus $310,000, a $30,000 difference. And I started to wonder. Then, 3 weeks before the closing, my daughter mentioned, casually, over the phone, the way you mentioned something you've already accepted, that Monty's company was doing some restructuring. He might be working remote for a while. His income situation was in transition. I asked what that meant. She said it was fine. He had savings. The mortgage was still happening. I asked if the lender knew about the change in his employment status. Long pause. He said it doesn't affect anything at this stage, she said. The approval is already done. I know enough about mortgages to know that employment changes absolutely matter, right up until the moment of closing. A lender can pull approval if your income situation changes. But I also know my daughter, and I know that she was not going to call off the purchase of her dream home on her mother's suspicion. So I didn't push. I told myself I was wrong. I told myself Monty had it handled. I told myself I would feel foolish later for worrying. I did not feel foolish later. The elevator opened on the 4th floor. My daughter's apartment was 4F, all the way at the end of the hall. The building has a small community room on the ground floor, which is where closings sometimes happen when both parties are in the same building. The sellers were renting 2C while they waited for the new house to be ready. I didn't go to 4F. I went to the community room. The door was mostly closed but not latched. I could hear voices. I pushed it open 2 inches and looked through the gap. My daughter was sitting at the table in the blue blazer she'd bought specifically for this day. She looked beautiful and nervous and hopeful in the way that broke my heart a little just to see. Across from her was a woman I didn't know, the closing agent, I assumed. There were papers spread across the table, a notary stamp, coffee cups. Monty was not there. There was a man sitting next to my daughter, leaning in, speaking quietly. He was not Monty. He was older, maybe late 40s, in a suit that looked expensive. He had a folder open in front of him, and he was pointing at something on the top page. My daughter was frowning at it. I pushed the door open. Everyone looked at me. My daughter's face did something complicated. "Mom, what are you? The closing already. Who is this?" I said. I was looking at the man in the suit. He stood up and smiled. He had the kind of smile that's practiced. "I'm Monty's attorney. He's been detained this morning, unfortunately. I'm here on his behalf to— Where is Monty? He's had a family emergency. He asked me to— What family emergency?" I looked at my daughter. "Did he call you?" She hesitated. "He texted. He said his mother— His mother is in Scottsdale," I said. She called me 2 weeks ago, looking for his new phone number. She doesn't have a way to reach him. They haven't spoken in months. I didn't know why she'd called me of all people. Maybe because I was the mother of his girlfriend and she thought I'd have it. It had seemed strange at the time. Now it seemed like a piece of a puzzle. The attorney was still smiling, but it had changed slightly. Gone tighter. "Ma'am, if you'd like to have a seat, I'd like to see what you just had her looking at," I said. "Mom, please." I walked to the table and stood behind my daughter and looked at the paper the man had been pointing to. It was an addendum, an additional document being introduced at closing, which is not standard practice, not without advance notice to all parties. It was an amendment to the financial agreement, and what it said, in the kind of language that's designed to be confusing, was that my daughter was taking on the full mortgage liability herself. Sole responsibility, in exchange for Monty's contribution being reclassified as a personal loan to her, with repayment terms to be determined. He wasn't buying the house with her. He was lending her money she didn't need, rewriting it so that she owed him, and walking away clean from any liability on the mortgage. I looked at the closing agent. She had the expression of someone who had not been told the whole story before today. "Is this document something you received in advance?" I asked. She looked at her file. "It was emailed to me this morning, at 6:42 a.m. My daughter's closing started at 8. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I handled everything perfectly, because I didn't. I said some things I probably shouldn't have said in front of a closing agent and a notary. I said them loudly. My daughter started crying, which she would tell you later was humiliating, and I would tell you it was the most understandable thing in the world. The attorney left when it became clear that no one was signing anything. He made one phone call in the hallway, very brief, and then he simply picked up his folder and walked out. No argument, no pushback. He left the way someone leaves when they've already been paid for, just showing up and weren't expecting much more than that. Monty never came. What we learned over the next 2 weeks, through the attorney my daughter hired, and through some things that came out when the lender was contacted about the discrepancy in the loan amount, was this. Monty had been fired from his job 11 weeks before the closing. He had not told my daughter, not really. Restructuring was the word he'd used, which was technically true, the way a lot of lies are technically true. Without his income, he could not qualify for the mortgage. He'd already been approved, but the approval was conditional. He knew it would fall apart if the lender found out. The $30,000 difference in the loan amount, the part I'd noticed at the kitchen table 6 weeks earlier, was money he had already borrowed against the transaction through a private lender. Money that was supposed to be part of his contribution, but had actually been structured so that if the house purchase went through, that debt would attach to the property, to her property, because he was planning all along to make sure the liability shifted to her before the ink dried. He needed her to sign that addendum. He needed her to take on the mortgage alone, with his loan in place, so that his own debt could be quietly satisfied from her down payment. $60,000 that she had saved for 9 years. When the full picture became clear, my daughter sat at my kitchen table for a long time without saying anything. The same table where she used to do homework. The same table where we had coffee the morning her father died. She sat there and I sat across from her, and I didn't say anything either, because there was nothing to say that would make it different. After a while, she said, "Did you know? Before this morning?" "I suspected," I said. "I didn't know. Why didn't you say more?" "I thought about that honestly. Because you loved him," I said, "and I didn't have proof. And I was afraid of being the mother who drove away the man her daughter loved for no good reason." She nodded slowly. "I would have been angry with you. I know. I'm not angry with you now. I know that too. There are things that came later that I don't need to dwell on. Legal things. Paperwork. The kind of process that moves slowly and costs money and asks you to recount everything in precise chronological order when all you want to do is forget the chronology entirely." What I'll tell you is this. My daughter bought the house. Not with Monty, not with any of his money, none of which turned out to be real in any meaningful way. She bought it on her own, 8 months later, after she'd had the time to look at the finances with clear eyes and realize she could do it. Smaller mortgage, same neighborhood, different street. The yard is not as big. The basement is unfinished. She called me from the driveway on the day she got the keys. She didn't say much. Just, "I'm standing in front of my house, Mom." I started crying before she finished the sentence. As for Monty, I heard through someone who knew someone that he'd done something similar before in another state with another woman. I don't know if anything was ever formalized legally. I hope so. I genuinely hope so, not out of spite, but because there are other women out there with 9 years of savings and a dream, and a man sitting next to them, pointing at a paper and saying, "Don't worry, this is standard." Cormac still works the night shift at that building. I brought him the casserole the following week, the one that had been sitting in my car through all of it. I reheated it before I brought it. It was a chicken and rice thing, nothing fancy, but he seemed genuinely pleased. He told me he'd reported the envelope and the text to building management. He'd never taken $1 of that money. I told him his daughter was lucky to have him. He got a little embarrassed about that, looked at his coffee thermos, said he just did what he'd want someone to do for his own. That's it, really. That's the whole thing. A watchman in a parking garage who had a daughter and a conscience. A mother who wrote down a number that didn't add up. A woman in a blue blazer who had saved for 9 years and deserved every bit of what she built. She's planting a garden in that yard now. Nothing fancy yet. Some tomatoes, some herbs, a rosebush she bought on sale at the end of last summer. She sent me a picture of it last week. The rosebush has 3 blooms on it. I have it as my phone wallpaper.